Hello and welcome back to Between Meetings and Motherhood. I am your host, Alexa Starks. I'm the founder of Executive Moms, the editor-in-chief of Mother Magazine. I'm a mom to two toddlers, and today we're going to be talking about what is a matriarchy and why don't we talk about it? So we're going to talk about the word, the history, the societies that exist right now, and what it means for us. So for the moms who are also in the trenches of working motherhood, today we're going to do something a little bit different. And I want to teach you a word. I want to start by teaching a word. And actually, I think I want to reclaim a word. I think maybe that's a better way to phrase it, reclaiming a word. Because I think one, it's a very misunderstood word. It's often feared, it's often dismissed. And when you really understand what this word means, what it actually means, like the origin of it, etymologically, something kind of shifts. And the word is matriarchy. And I think maybe you thought I was going to say matrescence because the word matrescence is going around. It's getting pretty viral. There was a big campaign about it. But the word I want to talk about today is matriarchy. So stay with me because I know maybe some of you tensed up. You're like, what is matriarchy? I've heard it. I know it. And maybe you've even heard this word thrown around as an insult, right? Or as an extremism, as an extreme form of some kind of feminine fantasy or feminist fantasy, right? And maybe you've even dismissed it without even really looking at what matriarchy means, what a matriarchal society is. Today, I'm asking you to set all of that aside. What I want to share with you is real. I want to share with you some history. I want to share some academia, and I want to share what exists on this planet right now. So let's get into it. First things first, let's break down the word itself. So before we talk about what a matriarchy is, I want to spend some time on the word itself because language matters and the roots of this word are actually really beautiful and powerful. So matriarchy comes from two ancient roots. And the first is this Latin word called mater, which means mother, right? And here's what's interesting. That mater didn't just mean the person who gave birth to you. In Latin, mater also carries meanings of nurse and origin and source, the root of something, the center. And then the second part is a Greek word, archein. I think I'm saying that right, archein. But that also has a double meaning. And the first of it is to rule or to govern, but it also means to begin or to be first or a foundation or a source of action. So when you put it together and you get matriarchy, you don't just get women rule. You get something much richer, much deeper. The mother as the origin, as the foundation, the mother as the beginning of things, as the source. Doesn't that land differently? Doesn't that feel so rich when you think about it? And how does that compare to patriarch? We'll get into patriarchy in a moment. But let's compare this word to the roots of the word of patriarch, which comes from pater, which means father, and then the same second half of the word of archein, father as ruler, father as origin. But when you look at it and you take the word patriarch dates back to at least the early 1100s, is where we start to see that word pop up. But then the word matriarchy as an English word doesn't even start to show up formally until closer to like the late 1800s. And it was actually created in response to patriarchy, almost as like an afterthought, as like a mirror image of a system that already had its own language, its own history, its own deep legitimacy baked in. But think about that, like for hundreds of years, we had this word for a father-led rule, father-led or male-led rule. And we named it, we studied it, we built entire legal and religious systems around it. But the concept of a mother-centered power didn't even get its own word until the late 1800s. That's not an accident. That's part of the patriarchal system. I feel like I've been talking about this a lot lately, like patriarchal systems and how patriarchal systems have impacted society today and created the lack of support for mothers and working moms that we have today. Anyways, I can digress. I can talk about that all day. Okay, let's talk about what does matriarchy actually mean. So now let's define this clearly because there's a lot of confusion even in academic spaces. And a matriarchy in its most foundational sense, is a social system in which women, particularly mothers, hold authority. And that can look like political leadership or economic leadership and economic control. It can look like social and moral authority. It can look like inheritance through the female line, or all of the above. But here's what it's not. A matriarchy is not a patriarchy with women in charge of herding men. It's not some crazy warrior state or Amazon warrior state where women dominate through force. Like, that image there is a projection of the patriarchal imagination of what female power would look like if it mirrored male dominance. And that's wrong. And I want to give an example that I pulled. So researcher and philosopher William Irwin Thompson wrote that when a man imagines matriarchy, he imagines a patriarchy with women swapped in. He doesn't even consider that a matriarchy might be a completely different system, one built on completely different values altogether. And that's the key insight I want you to hold on to for this whole episode, is that matriarchy is not just patriarchy flipped. It's fundamentally different. It's a whole different orientation towards power and community and what it means to lead. Because right now, a patriarchal society is built on dominance. It's centered on men and male dominance and male power and men holding onto power at the disadvantage of women. So a matriarchy is not women holding power to disadvantage men. It's not the inverse of a patriarchy, right? It is specifically about compassion and care. We'll talk about that, but I want to give 3 other terms that are worth knowing because they'll kind of come into play a little bit. So the first is matrilineal, and that means inheritance and family lineage are passed through women, through the moms. Not necessarily that women rule, but like your last name and heritage and who you are passes from the mother, not from the father. The second is matrilocal, which means that a husband actually moves into his wife's family home after marriage. And the third is matrifocal, which means that the mother is the emotional and practical center of the family unit. And we see this a lot already. This is not some foreign concept that only happens in like rural villages in South America. Matrifocal, the mother is the emotional and practical center of the family unit. We see that all over today in America. This is very common. And we see less that a husband moves into the wife's family's home, but we do see that a lot in other communities. Okay, so let's pivot into that now. I want to give you some real examples of societies where matriarchal societies and matrilineal societies exist right now on this earth today in 2026. It's March, but these exist. They're not myths. These are not relics from thousands and thousands of years ago. These are living, breathing communities that have operated this way as matriarchal societies for centuries, thousands of years. And researchers estimate that there's actually closer to like 160 matrilineal communities around the world. So I'm going to take you through a few of these. I wrote these down. And I'm going to try to pronounce all of this correctly because some of it is harder for me to pronounce. So the first community is called the Mozuo community in Yunnan province in China. And this is near southwestern China, is where this lives one of like the oldest continuing matriarchal societies on earth, called the Mozuo Society. And in it, property passes from women through the female line, and grandmothers actually manage family finances and make key household decisions. Children carry their mother's last name, and instead of traditional marriage, they practice what are called like walking marriages, where men and women don't cohabitate, and men visit their romantic partners, and then they return back home to their mother's home, and there's no shared property, there's no legal contract. Children are raised by their mother and maternal uncles. And actually, the Mozuo community is described by anthropologists as highly stable, with low levels of conflict and crime, and high degrees of family loyalty, and a deep emphasis on collective well-being and individual gain. Doesn't that sound nice? Because it's not about dominance. It's not the opposite of patriarchy, where it's women dominating men. It's women focusing on collective well-being and compassion and consensus for all and family, not women dominating or men dominating, but it's not the opposite of patriarchal society. So the second example I want to give you guys is in West Sumatra in Indonesia. And for the love of God, I cannot pronounce this. I'm probably going to butcher it, but let me see if I can pronounce this correctly. Minangkabau. The Minangkabau Society is the largest known matrilineal society in the world, numbering close to 6 million people. 6 million. And again, land and property are inherited through women. Ancestral homes are owned by the oldest female. Children take their mother's name. Senior women are deeply revered. The oldest village in the cluster of communities is called the Mother Village. And also, this community, they're practicing Muslims. So Muslim doesn't have to be the opposite. I mean, a lot of Muslim communities today, they're very, women are at the bottom. When we see this a lot with women's rights being taken away in a lot of Middle Eastern countries right now. But in this society, they exist. The two can coexist. The Islamic faith and women and matriarchal societies can coexist, right? We have women's ownership of land and property continues to anchor their power, and by custom, men cannot make decisions without women being involved. And so we see this is a huge society of 6 million people. And it's more than just, so in patriarchal societies, we see competition battling for dominance, right? We see men and women, it's about dominance, battling, and men are continuously coming above because they've rigged society. And so in this matriarchal society, social prestige goes to those who promote good relationships, not for those who accumulate individual power. That's a big difference. Okay, I want to give 2 more examples real quick. We have a society in India called the Qazi. I hope I'm saying that right, you guys. I'm terrible with even pronouncing names, let alone these harder names, but the Qazi. It's in a mountainous northeastern state in India. And the youngest daughter actually inherits the family's property and wealth, but the children take their mother's surname. They're one of the only societies in the world where actually the youngest daughter, not the oldest, holds the responsibility. And then the last example I want to give you is in Costa Rica. I think I'm saying it's either the Bribri or the Bribri, but either way, it's an indigenous community in Costa Rica where women are considered sacred, and they're the only people who can actually inherit land there. And property and cultural knowledge pass from mother to daughter, and men play important roles, but they do not hold the same authority over land and lineage. And so what all of these communities share, and what all of this research consistently shows, is there's a lower emphasis on hierarchy and competition, like we see in patriarchal societies, and a higher emphasis on consensus and cooperation and collective well-being and compassion for others. So these are not weak societies. These are stable societies that we see matriarchy and matriarchal societies thrive. So, but wait, I want to be really honest with you here, because I'm not here to oversell a fantasy. Academics consistently still debate whether a true, if you're listening to this in audio, I'm air quoting, whether a true matriarchy, meaning women hold absolute political rule in the way that men do in a patriarchy, academics debate whether a true matriarchy ever has fully existed or exists today, because most of the societies that I just described are better categorized as like matrifocal or matrilineal, where, it's just the cultural heritage and how things are passed, rather than fully matriarchal in the strictest sense. And even Merriam-Webster's dictionary notes that it isn't certain whether a true matriarchal society has ever existed. But let's talk about the framing. Because when we define matriarchy as women ruling the way men rule women in a patriarchy, we are literally using patriarchy as the measuring stick. Think about that. We're saying the only way to count female power as real is if it mirrors male dominance. And that's a trap. And scholar Heidi Gottner, I can't pronounce her last name, Abendroth, has spent decades studying these societies. And actually, she argues that matriarchies are not about domination at all. They're about consensus. They're about egalitarianism, equality. They're about organizing society around maturing, about nurturing and cooperation and collective decision-making rather than hierarchy and control, which is what we see in patriarchal societies. And she says that matriarchies don't fail to be matriarchies because they don't have a queen commanding armies. That's a patriarchal vision. They succeed as matriarchies because they've built something very different, something that doesn't require a single person at the top holding power over everyone else. So when we see academics debate whether a true, air quoting again, true matriarchy exists, they're using that framing of does it exist as the inversion of patriarchal societies, as women holding power and control and authority over men and using, domination and force. And they're not using that. They don't do that. They inherently don't do that. And so the problem is the definition of power and how we see it through a male-centered patriarchal lens. So, what does this actually mean for us? I've been sitting with this research for a little while now and honestly feeling really pulled in this direction. But what I keep coming back to is that we live in a culture that has told women, especially mothers, that their instincts around care and community and compassion and consensus and connection are soft and secondary and less than. And we're told that if we want to lead, we must adopt the framework of a system that was built without us, the patriarchal male system. We must be competitive. We must be individualistic and trying to hold on to our power and do what best serves us, right? We must be willing to separate our professional selves from our caregiving selves as if those two things could ever fully come apart. And we've spent so much energy trying to fit into that mold, and we apologize when we shouldn't be. We feel less than, like we can't thrive, even though we totally can. And so the mold is just wrong. Like, what if the values that motherhood cultivates, like being better attuned and collaboration and long-term thinking and investment in collective well-being, what if those aren't weaknesses that need to be hidden? Like, what if they are actually like the blueprint for a more functional, more sustainable, more human way of organizing around work and family and community? And the society we talked about today, this matriarchal society, it thrives because of these mother-centered values. That's so important. And so here's what I want you to take away with you today, that the next time someone uses the word matriarchy as a punchline, as something like extreme or some hilarious feminist fantasy or highly unrealistic, I want you to remember what that word actually means at its root. We've got mater, which means origin or source or foundation, and then archein, meaning beginning or the first principle or the place where things start. So a matriarchy is not a world where women are cruel. It is not a world where men are punished. It is not some radical fantasy. It is a world organized around the idea that the source of life, the caregiver, the nurturer, the builder of community, women, mothers, she is the foundation. You are the foundation. And honestly, that sounds really similar to a lot of what working moms are doing every day already. You're not just managing a career and a family, you're holding together the people around you while building something bigger than yourself. You're making decisions that require you to think 7 steps ahead, 7 people ahead, 7 years out. You're functioning as the emotional and logistical spine of your household and your team often. And so that is leadership. And the question isn't whether you're powerful enough for the world you're in. The question is whether the world you're in is designed to receive what you actually bring. And it's not, honestly, not yet, because we live in a patriarchal society and we have to work actively to redesign it. But we're naming it. It's one of the first steps. It's calling it out and building it and designing it. And every conversation like this is one part of how this changes. So thank you for being here. And if this made you think, please share it with another mom, send it to a friend, a colleague, another working mama in your corner who needs to hear this. Tag me on Instagram. I want to hear if this landed for you. You could tag me at alexa.starks. And if you're navigating maternity leave or working motherhood, please feel free to connect on Instagram or follow Mothered Magazine. That's mothered.magazine. If you, we have our spring issue coming out on March 31st. And until then, we'll see you in the next episode of Between Meetings and Motherhood. Thank you.